The sagas praised the Vikings as fearless explorers and warriors, men who defeated kingdoms and crossed oceans. But rarely did those same sagas speak of the people who walked behind them, chained, beaten, and forgotten. Behind every shining longhouse and every triumphant raid stood a darker world built on the backs of thralls, the enslaved people who formed the true foundation of Viking society. Their suffering was never carved into runestones, never sung in mead halls, never recorded in heroic poetry. But their stories existed hidden in the shadows, whispered only when the wind blew through the longhouse rafters. One such story began in the quiet riverside village of Lindholm, where life once flowed peacefully beneath a pale Scandinavian sky. Before dawn one morning, the villagers awoke to the slow, thunderous pounding of oars hitting water. It was rhythmic, heavy, and unmistakably wrong. Out of the river mist emerged for Viking longships, with dragon-headed prows snarling through the fog. For a moment, Lindholm froze. Children stared with open mouths. Mothers grabbed their sons. Men hesitated, unsure whether to flee or defend. Then chaos erupted. The Vikings landed with brutal speed, shields interlocked, axes swinging with terrifying precision. The village was overwhelmed in minutes. Houses burned, livestock scattered, and the screams of the captured drowned beneath roaring battle cries. For the Vikings, this was not a massacre, it was a harvest. They weren't here for land, they weren't here for glory, they were here for people. Among the captured was Astrid, a 16-year-old miller's daughter whose life had been quiet and simple until that morning. Her 10-year-old brother, Kalin, was clinging to her arm as they were bound together with ropes and marched toward the riverbank. Their mother lay unconscious behind them, struck by a raider who grew impatient with her screams. Astrid and Kalin were dragged onto one of the longships and forced into the lower deck, where human misery clung to the air like a second skin. They were shoved into a dark, cramped space with dozens of others men. Women and children, all trembling, all praying, all crying for help that would not come. The smell of seaweed mixed with vomit, sound of waves crashing against the wooden hull, echoed like distant thunder. Above deck, the Vikings laughed, drank, and told stories as though the suffering beneath their feet was nothing more than wind whistling under the boards. The journey northward lasted days, but time meant nothing in the darkness below. The captives had no sense of morning or night. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, and terror gnawed at their minds. When a man chained beside Astrid died from sickness, his body was hauled above deck without ceremony and tossed into the sea. Astrid watched the body sink, and something inside her understood. The Vikings did not see them as human. After the long and tormenting journey, the ships arrived at Capeen, a bustling Viking trade center where slaves called thralls were bought and sold like cattle. Astrid and Kalin were pulled from the ship and lined up on a wooden platform stained with old blood. Buyers walked past them, inspecting their teeth, their muscles, their eyes, determining their value. A wealthy chieftain, Halgir the Iron-Bearded, approached with calculating interest, inspected Astrid, then Kalin, muttering about their strength and youth. Within moments, he purchased both. The siblings were taken to his massive longhouse, a timber structure decorated with carved serpents and wolves. Astrid was assigned to labor inside the longhouse, sweeping the floors, grinding barley into flour, preparing meals, cleaning hides, hauling water. Thralls who worked indoors were considered slightly more valuable, but that did not shield them from punishment. A dropped bowl meant a slap across the face. A slow step meant a lash of the whip. Spoken word without permission meant days without food. Astrid learned quickly to keep her head bowed, her movements quick, and her emotions locked deep within her chest. Meanwhile, Kalin, small but determined, was forced into the fields and the iron forge where he shoveled coal, carried tools, and performed exhausting manual labor from dawn until nightfall. Years passed in this brutal cycle, and Astrid watched the world change around her. She served Viking warriors as they returned from raids dripping with blood and silver. She overheard drunken conversations about battles in Ireland, raids in Francia, and trade journeys deep into rivers leading eastward toward what would become Russia. She heard whispered debates about Christianity slowly spreading into Scandinavia and dividing families. And worst of all, she heard rumors that some chieftains still performed BLT ceremonies, human sacrifices, offered to Odin for good harvests and protection. Thralls were the easiest sacrifices. Every time Astrid heard that word BLT, a chill ran down her spine. Kalen, as he grew older, proved useful and strong. The forge master noticed he learned quickly and possessed excellent hands for blacksmithing. For the first time, Kalen earned praise from a Viking. His life improved in tiny, cruel increments. He was given slightly better clothing, slightly more food, slightly warmer straw bed, but Astrid feared what value might mean. In the Viking world, anything of value could be traded. And when a traveling merchant from the east saw the weapons Kalen had helped forge, he asked, "Who made these?" "The boy." He smiled with interest. "Good hands. I need strong boys for my caravans." Astrid felt her blood turn cold. Before she could even understand what was happening, Kalen had been soul-traded away for silver, cloth, and wine. He screamed for Astrid as he was dragged from the longhouse. Astrid fought against 3 guards as she tried to reach him, her voice cracking from grief. She watched her little brother disappear into the distance, chained, terrified, and helpless. That night, Astrid cried until her body shook uncontrollably. Then something inside her hardened forever. The following years hollowed Astrid out. She became quiet, efficient, emotionless. She learned the secrets of the longhouse: who was weak, who was cruel, who was kind, who could be manipulated. She listened carefully, always remembering the words of a one-eyed former berserker named Bjorn, who told her, "Your body is bound, but your mind is awake. Row. Never let them break that." She watched Halgir grow old and frail. When he finally died choking during a feast, chaos erupted as his sons fought for control of the estate. Thralls were forgotten during the dispute. Some tried to escape and were caught. Others were ignored entirely. After several days of disputes, Halgir's eldest son was declared the new master, and in a move meant to show strength and honor as he took leadership, he announced that all thralls who had served long years could choose to remain or be freed. Astrid stood frozen as the words settled over her. Freedom, a word she had not allowed herself to imagine, a word dangerous enough to hurt. But freedom was not a guarantee of safety, only separation. Freedom did not return Kalen. Freedom did not erase the horrors she had endured. Freedom did not erase the years stolen from her. Yet when her turn came, she lifted her chin and said, "I choose freedom." Astrid left the longhouse with nothing but the clothes she wore and her memories. She walked through forests she had not seen in over a decade, tears falling as she realized she no longer belonged to anyone. She eventually reached a Christian settlement where freed slaves were welcome. There, she worked as a weaver, living quietly but with dignity. She grew older. She never remarried. She never stopped searching the faces of travelers, hoping one day to see her brother. She died at 61 years old, her hands still marked by the calluses of servitude. Her story is not unique. It represents thousands whose names are lost to history. The Viking world celebrated warrior heroes, but it was built on the bones and backs of Thralls people like Astrid and Kalen. Their stories were never sung in the sagas, but they existed in every plank of every longship, in every crop harvested, in every raid prepared, every fire lit. Without them, there would be no Viking Age. They were the hands that built the North, the voices that were silenced beneath it. The winter that followed Rurik's first year in the North was unlike anything he had ever witnessed, a season so violent and unforgiving. It felt like the land itself wished to erase every stranger who dared to walk upon it. Snowstorms came not like gentle drifts, but like walls of white rage, roaring across the fjords and tearing through the settlements with the force of an army. The thralls, over 100 of them taken from different raids, were forced into the quarries at dawn, their feet wrapped in ragged cloth that froze solid within minutes. Their breaths formed clouds that immediately crystallized, clinging to their eyelashes like icy shackles. Rurik worked beside men from Ireland, from the Slavic states, from Scotland, from unknown villages burned to ash. They shared no language, no homeland, no kinship, only suffering. And suffering, in that place, was its own universal tongue. Each morning the guards, heavy with furs and thick metal brooches, dragged the thralls out of their huts with the butts of their spears. The sound of iron on bone had become so common that no one even winced anymore. They were marched to the frozen cliffs where blocks of stone were carved out, hauled by ropes thicker than a man's wrist. The ropes tore skin from hands, leaving raw flesh exposed to the cold, but those who slowed were beaten until they staggered forward. The Vikings had a phrase they used often: "Work makes a thrall obedient." But obedience in the north was nothing more than exhaustion so deep it hollowed the soul from the body. At night the thralls slept in long houses built for animals, not humans, no beds, only trampled hay and damp earth. Wind carved its way through the gaps in the walls like a blade searching for warm skin. That was when the stories began to circulate. A man from Francia whispered that he had seen the Viking shipbuilders marking certain thralls, carving small runes into their shoulders, the mark for sacrifice. They were to be offered to the gods during BLT. The blood ceremonies performed in the deep woods. Another thrall swore he had seen bodies, not warriors, not free men, hanging upside down from the pine trees outside the settlement. Their throats slit, their blood collected in wooden bowls. Whether these were warnings or rituals, no one knew, but fear made the already ice-cold nights feel colder still. Rurik did not believe most stories, but he had seen enough in his short life as a thrall to know that the Vikings were fully capable of such horrors. A people who believed suffering honored the gods would not hesitate to spill the blood of slaves if it pleased Odin's ravens. But the darkest truth of all surfaced in the silver mines far to the east, where Rurik was taken in the second year of his captivity. The journey itself felt like punishment. The thralls were chained together by the neck, the iron collar biting into their skin as they trudged across frozen rivers and jagged mountains. More than 20 collapsed on the way, their bodies left half buried in snowdrifts. When they finally reached the mines, Rurik felt as though he had stepped into another world, one carved entirely from darkness. The mine tunnels were deep and narrow, lit by torches whose flames coughed black smoke, turning every breath into a sickening heaviness. Thralls worked underground for 10, sometimes 12 hours, crawling into cracks barely wide enough for a man's shoulders. The air was a poison of dust and soot. Men coughed blood after only a few weeks. The guards did not bother learning names because most thralls did not survive long enough to matter. Bodies were dragged out every few days and tossed into pits behind the mountains, where wolves tore at them through the night. The Vikings harvested silver not with tools, but with lives. And yet, even in that pit of despair, humanity flickered like a dying ember, refusing to be extinguished. Rurik formed a bond with two others: Bran, a towering Irish man whose strength had once made him a warrior, and Leif, a timid boy no older than 12 who had been taken from a monastery raid. Bran protected the boy fiercely, shielding him when the ceiling collapsed one afternoon in a shower of rock. Rick pulled Leif from the rubble while Bran used his own back to hold the falling stones long enough for them both to escape. But the cost was unforgiving. Bran's spine bent under the weight, his legs crushed. The guards laughed as they dragged him to the surface, calling him broken cattle before throwing him outside in the snow to die. Rurik and Leif heard his screams carried on the wind for hours. That night, Rurik realized something terrible: Viking slavery did not merely take a man's labor, it devoured hope itself. Rumors swirled of a rebellion forming among the thralls in the settlements near the eastern trade routes. A Slavic leader named Velimir was said to be gathering weapons and secret axes, stolen from smiths, knives forged from broken chains, even sharpened bones fashioned into blades. The idea of resistance spread like wildfire through the thrall camps, igniting a dangerous kind of courage. Rurik felt it, to a restless anger that burned hotter than the forge fires. For the first time since his capture, he imagined a world where he was no longer property, where he could breathe without fear, where no man could beat him without consequence. But rebellion was death if discovered. No, the Vikings were merciless with traitors. They did not merely punish the guilty, they punished everyone connected to them. Entire groups of thralls could be executed for the actions of one. Rurik struggled. Was freedom worth risking the fragile lives of the only people he had left? And then came the night that changed everything. A blizzard had smothered the settlement, and visibility was so poor even the guards huddled in their huts. Rurik and Leif were gathering firewood near the tree line when they heard the muffled clang of metal on metal. At first Rurik thought it was the mines, but the sound was too close, too deliberate. When they approached cautiously, they saw figures: thralls, moving through the storm with stolen weapons. Velimir was at the front, his face carved with frost and fury. He saw Rurik and whispered, "Tonight we end our chains." Behind him were more than 40 thralls, each carrying something: an axe, a spear, a hammer, or even just a sharpened stone. And for the first time, Rurik felt something powerful surge through him. Not fear, not despair, but purpose. Velamir's plan was brutal and simple. Strike while the storm blinded the guards. Arm the stables to trap the warriors inside. Take the armory, kill the Jarl. Run for the mountains before reinforcements from neighboring villages could arrive. It was madness. It was suicide. It was freedom. Rurik looked at Leif the boy who had become a brother and realized that the world had already taken everything from them but one last choice. They chose to fight. The rebellion began like a spark in the heart of a frozen world. And for a brief moment, Rurik believed that spark might actually become a fire. As the blizzard howled outside the settlement, Velimir and the Thralls moved like shadows across the snow. Rurik felt the wind cutting through his rags like knives, but adrenaline kept him warm. The first strike was swift and merciless, the stables. They moved silently, spreading oil across the hay, while the guards slept, unaware that death was creeping inches from their throats. Velimir lit the torch and whispered, "For the ones we lost." Flames swallowed the stables in seconds, turning the blizzard into a swirling storm of fire and ice. The screams came next guards, warriors, horses, trapped inside the burning structure. Alarm horns echoed across the settlement. Gas exploded. Thralls rushed the armory, overpowering the half-frozen guards with crude weapons and pure desperation. Rurik fought beside Leif, swinging a stolen axe with every ounce of hatred carved into his soul. The first man he struck fell instantly, and for the first time Rurik saw that fear existed in the eyes of Vikings too. But the victory was short-lived. The Jarl's warriors, those who had not been trapped in the stables, emerged from their longhouse wearing full mail armor, their shields gleaming even in the storm. They were few, but they were trained, disciplined, and fueled by rage. They crashed into the Thralls like an iron tide. Velimir was the first to fall, a spear piercing his chest. He staggered back, blood pouring from his mouth, but even as he died, he screamed for the Thralls to keep fighting. The storm swallowed his last breath. Rurik grabbed Leif and pulled him behind a half-collapsed hut. Thralls were dying all around them, their rebellion breaking like fragile glass against the wall of Viking steel. For every guard slain, for Thralls fell. The snow turned dark with blood. The wind carried the sound of axes striking flesh, of bodies collapsing, of desperate men who had tasted hope for the first time and were now losing it forever. Leif trembled beside Rurik. "Are we going to die?" the boy whispered, his lips blue with cold. Rurik had no answer. What could he say? That he would protect him, that they would escape. Lies meant nothing in a place that devoured truth the way wolves devoured bone. Still, Rurik stood. He stepped into the open with the axe in his hand. If death was coming, he would meet it standing. He charged toward the Jarl's warriors with a roar that rose above the storm, a sound pulled from the deepest, most wounded part of his soul. He swung wildly, striking armor, shields, anything in reach. Pain erupted in his shoulder as a blade sliced across him, but he did not stop. The fight turned into a blur of snow and steel and blood and breath. Then he heard Leif scream. Rook spun around just as a lone guard reached the boy. Something primal snapped inside him. He lunged forward, barreling into the Viking with such force they both crashed into the snow. They struggled, wrestling for the axe, slipping in blood and ice. The guard was strong, far stronger than Rurik, but desperation gave Rurik a strength that defied the cold of the north itself. With a final heave, he drove the axe deep into the man's chest. The guard fell still. Rurik staggered to Leif. The boy's small hands were shaking. His breaths came in ragged bursts. "I don't want to be a slave anymore," Leif whispered. Rurik pulled him close. "You won't be, not after tonight." But fate is cruel, even when hope burns brightest. A horn blared. Reinforcements. Another settlement had heard the alarm and arrived with full-force warriors mounted on horses. Towering figures wrapped in wolf pelts, their eyes glinting with the thrill of the hunt. The rebellion didn't stand a chance. The final moments were a massacre. Thralls dropped their weapons in surrender, only to be cut down where they stood. Fires consumed the huts. The storm carried screams into the mountains. Leif clung to Rurik, burying his face in his chest as the world collapsed around them. When the warriors reached Rurik, he did not run. He did not beg. simply placed himself between the boy and the soldiers, raising his bloodied axe with the last strength left in his body. Blades struck him from every side. He remained standing until his legs gave out, collapsing into the snow with Leif still in his arms. The boy survived for only a moment longer. When the storm finally calmed, dawn revealed a graveyard of bodies scattered across the settlement, thralls and warriors alike, frozen where they had fallen. The rebellion had lasted less than a single night, but it scarred the land, the sky, and the memory of the Vikings who witnessed it. Months later, skalds told the story of the uprising not as a warning nor as a tragedy, but as a rare moment when the lowest in society dared to challenge the gods themselves. Thralls spoke of Rurik and Leif in hushed tones across distant settlements. Their story traveled beyond fjords, beyond markets, beyond empires, whispers of two souls who defied their chains even when they knew they could never break them. And in the centuries that followed, as the Viking Age faded into legend and slavery slowly lost its grip on the North, the tale of that frozen night lived on not as a story of failure, but as a testament to the human heart's refusal to surrender. For in the darkest corner of history, the rebellion of the Thralls proved one truth that outlived every empire. Even in chains, a human spirit can still rise.